Good morning, everybody. My name is Paul Ewasuik from Collibra, and I'm really excited to present to you our solution for managing and governing PII across the enterprise with Collibra. Overall, from some context perspective, the data environment is changing, and this is something that we all know and have all seen before, where there's more and more data than ever before, which also means more and more sensitive information across our enterprise. There is more and more privacy regulation. Historically, we've seen billions of dollars in fines with regulations like GDPR and CPRA in full force. Well, Bill C-11, the incoming CPPA in Canada, is expected to be enforced in the next few years. And lastly, with emerging technologies such as AI and analytics, there is so much opportunity for AI and analytics to actually change the world, as we're seeing countless examples at today's conference. With this, leveraging PII and sensitive information responsibly is of utmost importance. Despite this, we still struggle to govern PII across the enterprise. Questions like, do we know what is deemed to be acceptable use for PII in our organization? It's a very difficult question to ask, despite the fact that it seems so simple. Another question, do we know where all of our sensitive information, such as customer data, resides and how we're governing and securing it? How does our privacy team know where PII is being used across the organization? Or how are we preparing for Bill C-11? Many of these are questions that I imagine you in the audience are asking yourself as you have data everywhere, you have PII in places that it should be and shouldn't be, and we're all expecting the major changes around regulation, but also wanting to make sure that we're managing PII responsibly on behalf of our customers. The reason why this is so incredibly difficult is because data resides anywhere across the enterprise. This could be within inside of your analytics tools and your cloud environments, within inside of your CRM systems, your ERP systems, or any advanced analytics tools. It could also be in OneDrives or many other semi-structured or unstructured data sources. This could be across various lines of business, such as finance, HR, sales, marketing. They could all have a piece of PII that needs to be governed and managed accordingly. That's where Collibra comes in. Is ultimately the overall purpose of Collibra is to help you find, understand, and trust data across the enterprise, and PII is no exception to that rule. However, some examples of this would be how PII is moving across your organization, using data quality to identify if PII is in a place that it shouldn't be, using AI classification to identify PII across the organization, and then also infer its level of sensitivity for the privacy team. Know if sensitive information is being used inside of your analytics or machine learning or your end reports, and where it resides across the enterprise. One of the significant benefits of using Collibra when done properly is being able to quickly identify the location of personally identifiable information across your enterprise and identifying the context of the PII and applying the applicable policies and governance. In addition, monitoring the data to gain an understanding of user access to sensitive information and how it's being used can help you very easily in an audit situation to say, this is how we're using PII in accordance with our local laws and regulations, as well as international ones that we need to comply with. Lastly, that overall maintenance of compliance, providing visibility into data ownership and mapping of PII for compliance and audit teams to very easily generate these reports. The outcomes I've seen across my customers doing this is auto classification, identification of PII across connected sources, cataloging of data assets that contain PII, and obviously applying the appropriate policies, procedures, and security to it in the context of governance, privacy, security, and compliance. I'm sure that what you'd like to see next is this actually in the platform. So that's where I'm going to hand it over to Ahmad to show us a demonstration of the tool. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Paul. And thank you all again for giving us the opportunity to show you firsthand how Collibra can be used to help guide you in your journey towards not only classifying your data assets and enabling your data practitioners to truly understand contextual information about that data, but also showing you how through auto classification, you're able to rationalize your PII, PHI, or any other personally identifiable class. As Paul was alluding to in the introduction, it's becoming significantly more important for organizations to have that level of understanding. And through the use of Collibra, we will show you how quickly that can be realized. And perhaps more importantly, through the use of our edge architecture, how securely. Today, I'm going to walk you through a couple of different user journeys to best illustrate this. We will begin by briefly discussing how data is actually brought into Collibra. From there, we'll spend a bit of time going through the process of understanding that data. We'll then switch gears by jumping into auto classification and finish off with auto PII tagging, of course. And before I get started, I did want to mention that while this demonstration will be focused on highlighting the data catalog, there are several other modules such as business glossary, policy manager, data quality, and reference data that are just as powerful. And I would definitely encourage you to reach out to myself or the team, or the Collibra team at Big Data Toronto if you have any questions. So what you're seeing right now is a user logged into Collibra. So I happen to currently already be logged in as the data engineer, who at this organization has the responsibility of bringing in certain data sources into Collibra. So my starting point is going to be the data catalog. And what I'd like to show you at a high level is how I might actually register data into Collibra. Now, as a data engineer, I'm going to have elevated permissions to actually perform this action. And in the interest of time, I won't actually go ahead to the steps as I've already brought in data, but I will show you some of the parameters that you can select. I'm just going to quickly cancel out of this and head back over to data sources and focus in on the CRM in the refined database, the CRM refined schema. And we'll head over to the actions and the refresh, right? And simply by providing these handful of parameters such as server, port, typical database schema parameters, and of course, service account credentials, you'll quickly be able to see the kind of metadata we were able to ingest. Now, regarding connectors, Collibra boasts over 80 certified marketplace connectors, and we have a highly mature partner network, which allows us to scale as quickly as the data platform landscape is changing. So at this point, what I'd like to do is head over to the customer product sales table, which was brought in through this connection. And what we'll do is begin trying to review the metadata that was brought in. Right now, as a data engineer, I'd like to better understand the set and understand if this is in fact what I think it is. Now, looking at the summary tab, immediately I have access to all of this valuable information. I can see where this came from, the system, CRM cloud, the refined databases we've seen, and then within my CRM refined schema, I can see a handful of columns that are part of this specific table. I can choose to see them all if I click on this link. Of course, I have access to sample data as well. And what I can then do is head over to the details tab on the left-hand side here and begin understanding some of the associated business context. Whether this table has a specific cost to actually ingest into our environment, and how often it's refreshed, and so forth. And this, the data that you see associated to this specific table is fully customizable. So you can choose to store whatever specific attributes you would like to house within your specific table for your use cases. At this point, I'm going to jump into the diagram view. And what the diagram view is essentially, it's a representation of an artifact and all its associations. That's to say that you will be able to see clearly how data flows from source to destination, right? Where does the data from my table, customer product sales, come from, and where does it go? So I can see quite clearly here that the data from my customer product sales table is coming from several tables within my CRM raw schema, which is in turn populating a few tables in my CRM consumption schema. Now, as a data practitioner who's trying to understand various dimensions of this particular source, this is hugely valuable. However, as a data engineer, while this provides a helpful perspective, I really want to get a feel for the physical movement of data across my sources and investigate some of the transformations. So I'm going to hover over here to technical lineage. And I don't want to spend too much time in the technical lineage view, but I do think that it's a really powerful and again, fully automated feature that allows you to see at the most granular level how data is moving. So I've zoomed out here so we can get a better appreciation for how intricate data movement of my customer product sales table is, right? And if we think back to our primary use case of PII identification, right? Knowing a specific data element within a table is deemed PII, that's fantastic. But knowing how that data element moves across your enterprise, the various tables, views, and reports that it appears in, that's what most organizations are looking for today. And what you can actually do is narrow in on a specific column. So I'll pick this one and I'll click into column lineage. And what I can do is narrow in on the specific column and really begin absorbing the information for what's relevant to me in a much more succinct format. And I can also go one level deeper and toggle this code view and to begin understanding some of the transformations that have been applied on the specific element and the different tables, joins that were made against the specific attribute, right? And of course, doing all of this gives me the added confidence to say, you know what, this table does look like it needs to be onboarded to our full governance process. And what that means is that as an organization, we'd like to put this table through a little more rigor to ensure that it's properly cataloged. So I'm going to come up here under the actions bar, and I'm going to trigger the classify workflow. And what's happening behind the scenes is that the underlying data within this table is currently being sampled and profiled. And what's noteworthy is that this happens entirely on edge, which is located in the secure environment of the company. And this is game changing, as you no longer need to take any risks by taking your data outside of your network, which quite frankly, we've been seeing at more and more places, and it's a non-negotiable for many organizations today. And with the help of Collibra's machine learning capabilities, we're soon going to be able to understand not only the technical context of the associated data elements, but also the invaluable business context. So let's take a look at the output of our classification. I'm going to come over here and head over to the columns tab. And what we'll begin to see is that we have some data classes that have been evaluated. And I have a confidence score as well associated to each of these classes, which tells me that based on the different facets of classification, how much confidence I have, or the model had, that this is indeed what the engine says it is, right? And what I'd like to call out at this point is that while the columns for this particular table were fairly descriptive, this is by no means a requirement. And it was just set up this way to illustrate classification. As I'm sure most of you have seen, column names, especially on legacy sources, are rarely this verbose. Now, as a data engineer who's reviewing the output of classification, I'm going to begin by accepting some of these because birth date is in fact a date class and email address is in fact an email. And similarly, I can come back in here and reject some of these classes. So in the case of customer alternate key, it picked up that US driver's license ID was sort of this, or it recognized US driver's license. Now, this could tell me two things. Number one, the class could in fact be wrong, or number two, it could tell me that this specific data attribute or this specific column on a table is being used to store this this information, which again, it might be the field to store this information, or it might not. So that might trigger some sort of process reevaluation about how data is being handled in our pipelines. In my particular use case, what I'll do is I'll come out here and reject this data class. And now, as you would expect, these approvals, these rejections, what's actually happening behind the scenes is that that feedback is going back into the model and it's training it further. So then the next time it recognizes these approvals or these rejections, what it's going to start doing is improve its confidence level the next time it sees it. And finally, what I can actually also do is I can introduce entirely new classes. So for the case of English product name, what I can come in here and do is company product, right? I can introduce a new class specific to my own business. And again, as you would expect, the introduction of new classes also further trains the model. And as is the case with all machine learning models, accuracy and confidence improves as it runs through more and more iterations. I'm going to cancel out of here. And at this point, I'd like to take advantage of guided stewardship to add all of the further context that should be added. In this case, we're going to focus specifically in on email address. So when I click into the column, I can see the guided stewardship workflow is already telling me what I need to do. It's asking me to choose a specific data domain for my column. Now, given that we're in the customer product sales table, I happen to know that this is the customer data domain. So I'm going to click into that and click next. And just to give you a descriptive example of what's happening here as we progress through this workflow, what we're doing is we're bridging the physical data elements that exist within tables on databases and linking that with a logical or semantic model. And you'll get a much clearer picture of what that means as we look at the diagram. So again, at this point, I'm presented with the data attribute within this domain that maps to this physical column. In this case, I'm going to select the customer email address and proceed. Now, at this point, the workflow comes back and says, hey, not only is this physical data element associated to the email address, but we came across these other columns that also seem to link up. And at this, you can select the relevant columns. At this point, I'm going to proceed and click next. And now finally, it comes back and suggests other matches that are relevant to various logical data attributes within the domain. So you can see first purchase date is being matched again to date first purchase column. Some of these are relevant, some of them might not be. For the purpose of demo, we'll proceed and click next. And that's the end of guided stewardship. So at this point, I have everything linked together. What that enables is that when your average data practitioner logs in to view that information, they're able to do that in a number of different ways. And one of the best ways is to look at the diagram. So where we started off is right here within the customer. Let me pop over here to the catalog. Lineage business practice. So where we started off was right here within the refined database. There's a CRM schema, and of course, my customer product sales table and this email address, right? And what we did is we linked it with a specific entity within my marketing and sales analytical data model. And in turn, what that's done is you can see there are associated standards and data categories and associated business lines of business as well that specific data domain affects. So because the privacy stewards and business stewards did their job by linking their assets to the data domain, we're able to now absorb all of this information in a really intuitive way. And equipping your average data practitioner with this information really helps them to ensure that the usage of this column is best suited for their purpose, right? And now at this point, we were able to see how through Collibra's auto classification, we were able to identify data classes for entities and ultimately bridge our logical model to the physical. But central to this demonstration is also the subject of PII tagging. It's one thing to know that a specific column is deemed as a date field or an email or a full name, right? But it's another to know whether or not that specific column contains PII, right? So I'm going to come back in. I'm already in the columns view. And what I want to show you is that this simple act of me approving a full name data class on this specific full name column, which again, my privacy stewards have deemed full name as a data class to be personally identifiable. That simple act of me accepting that class, what's happened behind the scenes is as you're actually able to see at this point that this column is flipped off as this column contains personally identifiable information, right? It contains that tag. We can also see guided stewardship as in flight as well. And for the purpose of our use case, simple approval toggled that PII flag, but we could have just as easily introduced another additional approval cycle to further validate that. Now, at this point, I'd like to take a minute to reflect on what this means for data citizens. We saw how through largely automated processes, you can significantly improve data literacy within an organization. And more than that, if we think about some of the privacy regulations that have taken effect in recent years, such as GDPR, CPRA, and some of the others which are on the horizon, such as C11, central to all of those regulations is how customer data, and specifically PII data, is handled. There are rigorous enforcement frameworks that include things such as compliance orders. And now, as Paul mentioned in the introduction, Collibra serves to enable all data citizens to find, understand, and trust data. And one of the major components of trust in data is trusting that its usage complies to all of these new privacy regulations. I'd like to thank you for joining us today to show you how Collibra can be leveraged within your organization for the purposes of improving data literacy through auto classification and automated PII tagging. At this point, we'd like to open the floor to any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.